I'm Mackenzie Price, and welcome to Gifted Minds Beyond the Classroom. When people think about GT kids, they automatically think about them being super smart. And as parents of these kids, we all have examples of how this shows up. And I'll admit that for me, it is often a source of pride. I love seeing my kids do things that are way beyond the norm. But I'm also aware of what is sometimes a less glamorous side of having a GT child, and that is the surprising emotional depth and sensitivity they have. My conversations with parents usually start around academics, but invariably lead into discussions about what's going on emotionally and socially. Have you ever talked your kid through an existential crisis? Gotten a call from a teacher recommending counseling for perfectionism or OCD tendencies? I know this is hard to talk about, like, oh gee, my kid has this issue because he's so gifted. But it doesn't change the fact that our kids have super intense feelings that can be overwhelming for them and for us. As parents, thinking about emotional health and how we can help our kids in this area is critical. To launch our episode on emotional health, I knew immediately who I wanted to talk with. My friend, Dr. Matt Zakreski, is a psychologist, an expert on giftedness, and his passion for helping kids manage their emotional health comes across immediately. I am excited for you to hear what he has to say about managing emotional intensity. He compares it to riding out a storm, and I feel like that describes things I have experienced with my kids, and I believe you'll relate as well. And at the end, I'm going to give you 3 takeaways that will help you crush this parenting thing. So check it out as we go beyond the classroom. Dr. Matt, thank you so much for joining me to talk about emotional health. This is the most critical issue that I hear from parents all the time, and I'm really glad you're here today to talk to us.
I mean, it truly is my pleasure, and I agree with you. This is the most important thing. So I'm looking to dive right into this.
So I know gifted kids are unique, obviously from an intelligence perspective, but they also process emotions differently. Can you set the stage for us?
Yeah, I mean, a big piece of neurodivergent brains, which giftedness is a piece of neurodivergence, is how the brain is wired. And there are 2 important pieces to this that we should discuss. Obviously, we could spend hours on this, but I will try to be brief. The first is the limbic system. The limbic system is a series of interconnected structures in the brain that regulate our emotions, that send them through our brain. And given that the gifted brain has more connections anyway, there's more emotionality that comes with any kind of thought process. So there's more emotions and all the things to begin with. The other piece of this is the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex, right here, right in the middle of your forehead, front of your brain, and that you could conceptualize as the brake system. So if a gifted brain is like a super powered car engine, the prefrontal cortex has to brake that engine, has to brake the car. But the problem is the gifted brain is like a 2023 Ferrari Testarossa engine, but it's the brake system of like a 1988 Dodge Dart. It's not a great fix. So you've got this incredibly superpowered brain that's showing all these big feelings and sending them rocketing through the brain. And the part of the brain that's job is to sort them and stop them and regulate them is a little bit underdeveloped.
That's really interesting, and I think helpful for us to understand that these kids that we're dealing with, they're not average kids in any way. And so these systems in the brain are even showing why we see more intense emotional kind of ups and downs. What types of behaviors do we end up seeing more often in gifted children than maybe you do in your average adolescent?
I want to focus on sort of 3 things. The first is anger. So one of the things that giftedness comes with is a strong sense of justice. We will often get very angry very quickly on things that are against our values, or if somebody else is being put in danger or having their rights violated. So I often have kids get very angry because somebody else is being bullied, for instance. Second thing here is anxiety. Now, you can conceptualize the brain as a giant what-if machine. And what if this happened? What if this happened? What if this happened? And most of the time that's very helpful. And it allows us to conceptualize situations, prepare ourselves, what if I fail this test? What if that car in front of me merges? But if you have a supercharged brain, the what ifs come fast and furious. Like, well, what if they hated you? What if you failed that test? What if they lied? What if? And we end up spending a lot of time stuck in our own heads, right? Dealing with the thoughts and the feelings that come with them. And last but not least is existential depression. So everybody gets sad. Everybody has bad days. Depression is a darker, more longitudinal emotional state. But gifted people are particularly susceptible to existential depression, this idea that life is bad and it's not going to get better. And I don't have a space in this world that fits me. And, this all sounds very, very melodramatic. Not that any gifted person, myself included, would ever be melodramatic, of course.
Of course not.
But
Absolutely not.
of course not, never, not once. But the idea is that the world is built for neurotypical people. The world is built intentionally for people whose brains don't work like our brains do. So that feeling of existential depression, that I don't fit in the world as it was built for me, it actually makes a lot of logical sense because we really don't fit in the world.
So what you mentioned about that idea of this righteous anger, I can totally relate to that. My daughters, especially my older one, I mean, starting at age 3, she would call me out if I even said one negative thing about grandma when she wasn't in the room. She was like, you shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't do that. And the existential depression is a really interesting topic too. You work with so many children, especially probably young children. How do you see this play out with young children, these 3 things you mentioned?
Well, and that's why I think it's so important to get kids into services as early as possible. Now, services doesn't necessarily mean a mental health professional like myself, though certainly if it's indicated, by all means, start as soon as you can. But it's about helping people find their spaces, and if that is a school for gifted learners, if that's an after school club, whatever that thing might be, you want to give people a way to plug into that. Because the sooner we start, the sooner we build the skills and the more they generalize. But what this ends up playing out when we think about these big 3 feelings is a lot of disruption. And kids, as a rule, are very impacted by their systems. Home is a system. School is a system. Their religious education, their soccer team, Boy or Girl Scouts, it's all systems. And big feelings are disruptive to those systems. But the way the systems work is they want a certain amount of what we would call compliance. So, hands folded, staring straight ahead, eyes on the teacher, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. So what ends up happening is kids who are quote unquote good kids have big feelings that disrupts the system. And the adults in charge of those systems will tell the kids, I need you to calm down. I need you to not be so upset. I need you to let it go. And it ultimately teaches our kids that they're not allowed to have those feelings, right? Don't get angry. Don't be nervous. Don't be sad. But feelings don't go away like that. So it actually sort of builds them. It shoves them down to build them back up, and they may explode at a later date.
So this can be so stressful, not just on a child who's being told, hey, don't feel this way or calm down, it's fine. But as a parent, this is a super stressful situation. When we have a kid who's melting down in some way that we just can't even quite relate to, how do we as parents handle that?
When we all became parents, I don't think any of us thought it would be easy. I don't think any of us thought it would be quite this hard. And so the idea is the best way to help your kid regulate is to co-regulate. So there's this idea that as adults, we need to be calm so our kids can calm down. But that's not true. And frankly, it's not always possible, right? I mean, telling somebody to calm down when they're upset is counterindicated. It makes them more agitated. So the metaphor I often use here is consider big feelings like a thunderstorm. Now, most of the time, thunderstorms, you see them coming, right? Big dark clouds on the horizon, they're moving towards you. The wind picks up, you hear those booms in the distance. So if you see that thunderstorm coming, you don't go pick up your picnic and go sit in the backyard because you know the thunderstorm's coming. You're going to adapt your behavior. Now, you don't have to be happy about that, but here's the trick. when you give yourself permission to feel the things you're feeling, it helps you get unstuck and deal with the problem. A lot of what happens to us as parents and really as people is we spend a lot of energy wishing we didn't feel the way we did. Like, I don't want my kid to be upset. I don't want to be frustrated that my kid is upset. Yeah, no, I don't think anybody woke up this morning wishing that those things would happen, but they are. So we co-regulate by acknowledging our circumstance and then giving ourselves permission to be less than perfect parents and say, yeah, it's frustrating me because we're trying to get out the door and you're having a meltdown. However, by giving myself permission to be frustrated, it's going to increase my empathy, which is going to increase my ability to help you through this meltdown. So we actually end up getting out the door faster.
Dr. Matt, I still cringe remembering times that I was in a public place. Like, I remember being in a drugstore and my daughter just losing it. And, it frustrated me. It made me, it messed up my plan for the day, all of those things. And I think when we have these public outbursts, especially over, feelings that maybe we don't necessarily relate to, like, why is this kid so upset about this thing? How do you recommend parents handle those types of behavioral issues, especially when out in public?
Yeah. And my empathy meters, I've been there, and it's somehow even worse for me, right? Because I'm like, I'm a child psychologist and I should know this. And then it gets to the idea, and this is an important thing for all of us to remember, is that no one knows us when we're out in public. They don't know us as what we do, who we are. We are another parent who is struggling in that moment. And I think if you could freeze time and take a survey of all the people around you, the vast majority of them would be empathetic and be like, oh my gosh, I remember, I've been there, which hopefully it gives us a little self-compassion. So we're going to deal with public meltdowns in two ways. The first thing is being proactive, right? My grandfather always used to say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But when you go a place with your child, especially if your kiddo is neurodivergent, take 3 minutes in the car and say, hey, we're going to the drugstore. We're going to be there for 5 to 10 minutes. I need to buy these two things. How do you feel about going to the drugstore? Have that conversation. And if your kid's like, no, 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 I won't, then maybe it's better time to lose the battle to win the war, right? Step away or do a different thing. But if your kid is willing, then take an assessment of what tools and resources you have at your disposal. Do you have an iPad? Listen, I love the iPad. It's my get out of jail free card. I don't use it all the time, but you better believe it that I use it sometimes. Do I have snacks? Do I have a bouncy ball? Does my kid have a book? A little paperback book in the car can solve many a problem. So if you've done your proactive work and you go in and the meltdown still occurs, the most important thing to remember is no one would choose to melt down. Meltdowns are so disruptive internally, no one would choose to be that upset. There is something triggering it. There's something that's causing that to happen. So if you can get yourself in the headspace of, I don't have to like this, but I understand that my child isn't choosing this behavior, it's going to give you more latitude to do different things. Then we take a step into, how do you resolve the situation? The first thing you do is you get near your kid's level and you just hold some space, and you've got to be willing to buy time. Now, that's hard, right? In public, if you're in Target and your kid is kicking over racks of dresses in the dress section, it's a hard thing to do. And sometimes the best thing to do is just get out of there. But if you can hold space, your kid will come back to you. And one of the things that we do is we charge into the thunderstorm, right? We tend to charge into the thunderstorm, which puts us at risk. The best thing to do is be somewhere safe until the storm rolls over. And it will be intense and scary and probably pretty upsetting. But the nice thing about thunderstorms is they don't usually last all that long. So you may just have to hold space until the storm has passed, but then you can go in and work with your child to say, what are our next steps and how do we fix it? Where do we go from here?
My kids are older because, I've got teenagers. So not only am I dealing with like the emotional roller coaster that is life with two teenage girls, but they're super intense about their academics. They're very into doing well in school, and they just seem to take everything more seriously. What's your advice for dealing with gifted teens?
So gifted teens, it's all about what I would call appropriate autonomy. So the idea here is that all teens seek autonomy. That's developmentally appropriate, right? You want to learn how to drive a car. You want to go to the dance. And our problem as parents is that we don't want our kids to have the autonomy, because the more autonomy they have, the more risk they undertake. So there's that push-pull, right? Now, like you said, Mackenzie, when you've got teens, that ramps up to 11. And when you've got gifted teens, that ramps up to 15. So it's hard. The biggest thing you can do is be strategic and planful in the conversations you have around the things you want your kids to do. So, one of the things that kids do, intentionally or unintentionally, is like running out the door. By the way, Mom, I'm going to sleep over at Bob's. Bye. And they're out the door. And it puts you in this thing that you either need to say yes because they haven't really given you a chance to say no, or you have to say no and bring them back into the house, and there's already conflict. So setting aside 15 minutes on, say, Saturday at lunch to sit down and say to your teen, what's coming up? What are the things that are on your schedule? What are the things you want to do? Let's have conversations about them. What that does is it shows your teen that you value them, that you are treating them appropriately and with respect. So creating time and space for your teen to say the things that are on their mind, the things that they are considering, is going to make for more what we call pro-social conversations, the best social version of a conversation, because a lot of parents feel like they have to say yes because they don't want their kids to get upset, or they feel like they have to say no because the world is an unsafe place, or I didn't get that when I was a kid. And there are times you're going to say yes, and there are times you're going to say no. That's what we signed up for as parents. But if you can do that within the structure of a defined time to have these conversations, you're setting yourself up for more success. And I think that you and your teen will leave that conversation maybe not necessarily getting what you want, but feeling okay about the outcome.
Absolutely. You mentioned, talking about what if scenarios with little kids. I find myself having a lot of those conversations with my teenagers now, where my daughter will sometimes kind of almost melt down and like, well, what if I don't get into Stanford or Harvard or, Vanderbilt or my fourth choice or whatever it is. And we often talk about like, hey, your life can still look wonderful even if this one thing doesn't come out the way you think. So we play the what if game a lot too, with teenage types of activities. That's great advice that you've got for kind of all ages that we work with.
Remember, anxiety always pulls us to the future. There's nothing you can do right now to get you into Stanford in 2 years. It doesn't work that way. All you can do is focus on doing the best stuff you can right now. And then you will look up and it will be 18 months from now, and you'll be sending off that application to Stanford. All we can do is deal with the problems that are in front of us right now, and trust that in doing so, we are leveling ourselves up enough to deal with the problems that come our way in the future, because we know problems are coming, right? There's nothing we can do to stop that. Just, there will always be another thunderstorm. So all we can do is buy a better raincoat. And if we do that, then we are gearing ourselves up to handle whatever comes our way.
Well, Dr. Matt, I am so grateful for you to be a part of this episode. Again, I think emotional health is something that we as parents really have to think about and focus on. And then, as you mentioned, kind of protect ours as well, and just be comfortable. I think the thunderstorm analogy is such a great one that we can really connect with. We got to ride them out. We know that they're coming, and we know that the sun always comes out at the end of it as well. So thank you for sharing all of this advice with us. You're truly a gift to your clients and us as well. I appreciate you being here.
Cheers. Take care.
Ready for today's takeaways? Here are the 3 things from this conversation with Dr. Matt that will help you the next time you are about to pick up your kid and drag him out of Target. Number 1, practice co-regulation. Own and acknowledge your feelings, and then you can acknowledge your child's as well. And take a breath rather than rushing to fix the problem. Number 2, be proactive. Talk with your kids ahead of time. Play what-if scenarios to get them prepped for how they might respond to things that come up, and establish code words to help them feel they have a way to communicate when they feel overwhelmed. And number 3, stay in the game. Manage what's in front of you and let your kids know you are on their team. Thanks for joining me, and for all of your friends who can relate, tell them about Gifted Minds. Check us out on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Let's go crush this.